Peace of Christ be with you. This is a midweek reflection for Third Reformed on September 23rd. Over the last couple of staff meetings here at Third, we have been revisiting our staff values. You might not know that such a thing even existed. I'm somebody who thinks that values matter quite a bit, that the character you conduct yourself with counts for a lot in this world. And when I first came to Third, I thought it was important to establish some shared values to guide our work together as a staff here at the church. So, we have these overarching values of faith that we know we hold in common. You might consider those bound up in our church vision statement of being a community of Christ's disciples and the presence of Christ to our neighbors. What I felt we needed were some more specific values that really get at the nuts and bolts of how we interact with one another, how we show up in these roles that you all as a congregation have asked us to serve in. So we established some staff values. Some of them were ones that I brought and proposed. Some came out of conversation. And a couple of times over the 4 years I've been here, we've revisited them just to check back in and see if there's any changes that we want to make to clean up the language and get it a little more concise or to add anything in. Our current set of staff values looks like this. And I will include a PDF copy of these in the description of the video so that you can take a look at those if you want. I've always put them on this sheet with an image of an olive tree, which is a significant symbol out of the biblical world. Olive trees are resilient. They are rooted and grounded. They can sustain damage and continue to push forth new growth and evolve. They produce fruit, and that fruit gets better the older that it gets, the longer that it is doing that fruit-bearing work. And it felt like a helpful metaphor, an image for our own lives as we seek to bear good fruit and be resilient and remain grounded in Christ. So I thought today I would just share what those staff values are, the things that we agree to pursue together in the way that we work, and maybe even could spill out into the way that we live as a congregation together. So the first value we have is to act with integrity, which we define as saying what you mean and doing what you say you will. You may have heard me say before in sermons and a couple other settings that most of the times I've ever gotten in trouble in pastoral ministry and had to go clean up relationships where damage had been done, most of the time it was because I either didn't say what I really meant or didn't do what I said I would do. And that's a gap in integrity. And those are things that I'm always trying to pay attention to, be aware of, so that I can do the work of restoring integrity. So that's our first one right out of the gate. Say what you mean and do what you say you will do. The second one we have on there is to assume positive intent. I think for most of us, it can get really easy to get defensive, to have our hackles go up when we hear something that somebody else says that we may not disagree with or that we suspect may have a hidden motive behind it, that there's some secret agenda that people are working to get through, and we come into interactions or relationships or conversations with an air of suspicion, of doubt, of guardedness, of defensiveness. We assume that there may be something going on that we don't get to see. So as a staff, we say we want to assume positive intent of one another and of everybody in the congregation as we work. That even if somebody comes with criticism or pushback on a decision that's been made, we assume that there is positive intent there, that that person wants what is best for the church, that they want to be doing God's will. And that if we can start with that assumption, we can probably find our way to a mutual understanding that's going to allow things to work. The third value that we name is to be fully present. Right? Our lives are so fragmented where our attention gets pulled in 1,000 different directions at once. I think of that even times when I see families at a restaurant together and everybody at the table is engaged with their phone, right? They're all sitting in the same place, but they're not fully present. They're not really there with each other. So one of our goals is to be fully present. When I'm at home and in that dad role, I'm fully present to my kids, or at least I try to be. When I'm here, I try to set those concerns aside. I know that that's a hat that I'll put back on at some point in the day, but when I'm here, face to face with somebody, engaged in work, I try to be fully present to that and fully available to them so that people know that they have access to me. The next value we have is to communicate directly. Right? Triangulation is a dangerous thing in a community. It can play out in a lot of different ways. Most often it's kind of, I have a problem with somebody else, but I don't want to go deal with it directly, so I'm going to go to a third party, somebody who knows both of us, and tell them about the problem I have with the original person, maybe in hopes that they'll go do the hard work for me and say, oh man, you really got to cut out da 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 da. Or maybe I'm just building support for my own case so that if it comes out that there's a conflict between me and another person, there'll be all kinds of people I've already recruited to my side of things. And it can be easy to talk about people, but harder to talk to them. And so one of our values is to communicate directly. When an issue arises, we go to one another and we deal with it head on. We don't start talking to everybody else on staff or around the congregation about that. And it means that when there are significant things that need to be communicated, we do it face to face, not through a text message or not through an email where so much misunderstanding can creep in. Our next value is to listen to understand. This is one that comes up a lot for me, not just in staff leadership, but in premarital counseling especially, or helping couples navigate issues. I think a lot of us tend to operate with this listen to respond mindset, not a listen to understand. Right? So we're listening and you're kind of nodding along and going, but the whole time you're really framing your rebuttal or your response in your head. And as soon as that other person stops talking, you're ready to jump right in immediately with your response. So we try to make a value out of listening to understand, to not have on that response or rebuttal hat the whole time, but to be seeking understanding, saying, tell me more about that. Here's what I heard you saying. Does that sound accurate? And really making sure you understand and hear what somebody has to say before you give your own response to it. Our next value is to advocate for one another. And that happens within the staff and within the congregation as a whole, to say that we've got each other's back, that we will share criticism, that we'll give hard feedback when we need to, that we'll ask good questions, but we are for each other and never against each other. So we want to make sure that we are supporting the work that others are doing, and that if we have a part to play in helping encourage what's going on or supporting it in the life of the church, that we're going to step up and do that for one another. Our next staff value is to work with the whole church in mind. And it's not enough to just pay attention to whatever your area of responsibility is. So for Isaiah, working with youth, or Jen working with children, Pam, who works with the music, Kate, who's paying attention to Kids Hope and outreach type efforts. That we can't get so caught up in only paying attention to what it is we're doing. We want to be thinking about how that impacts other things that are going on, how that plays into the whole life of the congregation, so that we are all moving in the same direction and understand that the roles that each of us have been asked to play are a part of a much bigger whole. And our final staff value is to live and serve with intention. Right? To not just go through life on autopilot, to not just do the bare minimum, to not just be content to fall into a rut of doing the exact same things in the exact same ways, but to really show up with a sense of intentionality, to live on purpose, to bring our best creative energy to the work that we have to do, and to make a conscious decision to say, when I am working on behalf of God's people at Third Reformed Church, I'm going to bring the best of who I am. I'm going to draw on all the gifts that God has given me, and I am going to be intentional about the way that I love and serve the people that I've been called to be amongst. So that's where our current set of staff values is. When I do reviews with staff, halfway points and year-end reviews, part of it is taking a look at those values, saying how well do you think we as a staff have been living into those? How well do you think you personally have been living into those? And what are the ones that have come easy for you in this season of ministry? And what are the ones that have been hard or you have had to do some growth in? And that for me, and I would say, you can ask the other staff members, but I would say for us as a staff, has been such a helpful thing for grounding our work together and giving us a common understanding of what it means to really show up as our best selves. So I would love some feedback from you on what you think about those staff values. If there's any that you've found helpful in your own life, be it in relationships in your home or in a workplace, or things that you think could be helpful for us to think about as a staff, but for us as a congregation too, about how we can live in community well together.